6:30. We'll wait for 5 minutes for people to join in. I hope you all are doing well, not taking up an opportunity even if it is a partial unlock. I hope you are taking the best care of yourself and trying to suppress your travel kida as well. I guess the safe travel is going to take more time now. Uh, I would suggest the one who are probably using their DSLRs since probably last 8 or 10 months, or just bought DSLRs maybe just prior to lockdown for this uh, probably a good travel season. I would suggest just keep your DSLRs with you. Uh, Even if it is a mirrorless camera, the any other prosumer camera in case you have, or even a point and shoot camera if you have, please make sure those cameras are with you. I hope I'm audible. Can someone gives me a thumbs up? Am I audible? Rugved, Sudeep. Okay, okay, Rugved. I got your thumbs up. Fantastic. Fair. All right, all right. We'll wait for 2 minutes more for people to join in. It's typically 6:30, but considering Indian stretchable time, we'll have to give away 5 minutes. Maybe people who have just started going back on office, a place of work again, they have to move, come back. Probably 6:30 is the time when they come back. I also suggest all of you to make sure that whatever doubts you have in any journal regarding photography or anything to deal with the settings, or maybe the problems you face in a particular situation, please note down them with you. Fine. As we progress towards these 5 subtopics which I'm gonna cover today, as and when it applies, you may type those in the feed. I'll try and pin it down. I'll try to make sure that every possible doubt is resolved. Uh, but make sure you note it down. If you have already noted down, nothing like it, you can always start typing. I'll keep a note of those questions. Maybe if I forget, then at the end of session you may go ahead and remind me. That's completely fine. We'll wait for a minute more. I can see a lot of people joining. Hi Janisha, hi Mayuri, hi Anand. I can see Jinay as well. I guess it's 6:35, and I feel it's a time we are good to go ahead. Let people join in between, but let's begin with what we are exactly going to deal with today. As the poster mentioned, we are going to see a very basic things related to DSLR. You know, say in last 3 years, 4 years, or last 5 years, maybe due to Instagram, maybe due to excessive use of social media, or the travel and social media being going hand in hand. uh, there is an obvious requirement for any amateur or any person or any traveler, or for that matter any tourist, that whenever they visit any place, whenever they go to, they spend money and go somewhere on a vacation, there is an obvious requirement that the person goes there want to make sure the memories are captured in best manner. Fine. So we have stories to tell, we have memories to tell. The only way people actually preserve these type of memories or stories is by obviously a photograph. Fine. A photograph is probably that one medium which allows you to actually recollect, memorize, go back, spread the word, maybe on a social media, maybe you project yourself via blogs. Maybe there are professional bloggers, maybe there are amateur bloggers, maybe there are bloggers who just want to express without any commercial gains. But one common thing we see in all these individuals or set of individuals is they need kick-ass pictures. With every article or with every listicle or advertorial or anything which you want to project, even if it is on a print format or even if it is on electronic format these days, you need a kick-ass picture to accompany that. And you know in order to make those kick-ass pictures, you obviously need good gadgets. So there is always a myth which runs around in travel industry that the moment you buy a costly camera, the moment you buy this brand camera, that brand camera, you will be able to make amazing images. Trust me, I'm a photography educator since last many years. I teach in the University of Mumbai affiliated colleges, specifically photography, print production, photojournalism, and most of the situations where students belonging to a teenage 18 to 20, 22, they actually believe it to be true that the moment you are going to pay a lakhs of rupees on camera, you are actually going to make a good images. Well, it is not like that. Whether it is DSLR, whether it is a mirrorless, or whether it is even a mobile camera or any action camera, the fundamentals of photography or the fundamental functions, you need to make sure that they are deep rooted, they are understood, uh, you should be able to analyze them, you should be able to strategize as and when which function is to be used, how much to be used. And once you start strategizing them a lot, and over a period of time, at a point of time, you will come to a situation where you will start exploiting them. The moment you start exploiting those basic functions in gadget or of that DSLR or of that camera, you will start realizing that there is a limitation to this gadget. There is a limitation to DSLR. There is a limitation to the lenses you are using. And then you start upgrading your equipment. So fundamentally, you start with a journey of understanding gadget, understanding the concept of photograph, and you reach to a conclusion that now I need a new gadget or a upgraded equipment or with some XYZ reason. At the same time, in economics, as we see, there is a demonstration effect as well. Say, may it be Sony, may it be Canon, may it be Nikon. Uh, every brand, after every 6 to 8 months or a year or so, they keep coming with different fleets of DSLRs, cameras. Fine. So people keep on asking what type of DSLR I should be buying, what type of lenses I should be buying. So specifically, whenever if someone comes with a situation like this, what we generally tell that what type of images you want to make. So the requirement of yours generally has to lead to a decision what type of camera or what type of equipment and how much money you are going to spend on that equipment. Fine. So if your requirement is very specific that I'm gonna be only doing travel photography, fine, your specific budget is fine. If your requirement is travel plus portrait photography, your budget increases. If your requirement is travel portrait, okay, I'm interested in wildlife, okay, then you'll have to even shell some more money in order to take some more telephoto type equipment, and the list goes on. There is no limit on which the way in which you can buy equipment on. Fine. But fundamentally, it finally roots down to a situation whether it is a DSLR worth 15,000 or whether it is a DSLR worth 2.5 lakh. The fundamental DSLR or mirrorless function never changes. Fine. So keep that in mind that, you know, all those features which are probably there in the 2.5 lakhs camera and the features which are there in 15,000 camera are probably fundamentally same, but they are upgraded according to the cost and the quality and the requirement. So first settle down on what you exactly require. The moment you require, or whatever your requirements are, you should be able to sustain or figure out or finalize that, okay, this is what I finally require. uh, let's start with our topic number one. Again, I'm going back absolutely to fundamentals, the way in which traditionally people used to learn photography. They used to first clarify their fundamental concepts, then a step ahead, then a step ahead, and then they start practicing photography. So let's start with obviously our topic number one, that is exposure triangle. Fine. The moment I say exposure triangle, obviously triangle has three angles. So exposure decision also generally consists of three decisions. Traditionally, the decisions used to be only based on two angles. So traditionally, this exposure triangle was missing. The moment in last 20 years, the rise of digital platform, the rise of digital gadgets have increased, the exposure triangle has arisen. And to begin with exposure triangle, I would start the first angle of exposure triangle, which most of the people are generally confused with, or they have a little idea about the angle, is ISO. Uh, Categorically, people have been saying that ISO is a standardization, ISO is a sensitivity, ISO is international office. I would just I like you to note that ISO for cameras world over are those accepted sensitivity standards which which are completely unified when it comes to camera manufacturer. If I want to put it in a very simple words, the ISO would be, you know, a light gathering ability or capacity of sensor, which is dependent on what ISO you set. So let me just put it how we consider ISO generally. ISO we consider as, it starts from say ISO 60, maybe ISO 100, maybe ISO 200, 320, 400, 600, 800, and then there are numbers. So, for example, many of you might have tried, you know, doctoring that ISO or changing that ISO in your cell phone or maybe via your DSLR. When you obviously take a gadget, you try all your functions. Fine. So, simply, if it is all about gonna be sensitivity of how to gather light, uh, uh, you will require. I'm sorry, I guess I'm getting a. Alright. So as and when we require our camera sensor to understand what and how much light is supposed to be gathered is obviously depend on what's there in ambience light. Say if you just look at right now in my face or on my face, you will always see there is one direction. There is a light falling from this direction. So this part is lit up, when I'm not so sure whether my camera quality actually suggests this or not. I'm not so sure, but my this part is better lit up as compared to this part. So when I say light gathering ability, the ISO probably require, if I'm going to capture like this and if I'm going to capture like this, is gonna be different. Fine. At the same time, the light which is falling on this, you know, background, or probably light which is probably falling somewhere else, is absolutely going to have a different requirement of ISO. So just to keep in mind or to have a shortcut on your side, that if the light available is low, again I repeat, the light available is low, you tend to use high ISO and vice versa. So if there are gloomy conditions, if there are low light conditions in cave where you want your camera sensor to work best, you use generally a higher side of ISO. And going back to vice versa situation, whenever there is a bright light, a daylight, a light in which probably there is no, great shadows which are there, and you have an ISO like that, you probably go for the lowest possible ISO. Now, if you will start asking me if this is a situation, then ISO is a game changer. Obviously, ISO is a game changer when it comes to DSLR. But there is a glitch. Say it doesn't happen this way that the moment there is a low light and you keep on increasing ISO, so 100 to 200 to 400 to 800 to 1600, 3200, 6400, H1, H2, H3, and whatever numbers any camera manufacturer come up with. So the glitch is, as and when you start increasing your ISO numbers, the quality of image starts deteriorating. So the moment your ISO starts from 100 to 200, 200 to 400, 800 to 1600 and on, depending on the sensor quality, depending on the availability of light, your pixels or the definition of colors actually starts giving you something called as visual noise. Fine. In more technical terms, in photography technical terms, we call them monochromatic or color noise. Fine. So whenever we start increasing ISO, we are actually exploiting our sensor to next level. So at some point of time, sensor gives up and it starts giving you a completely degraded quality. Fine. So just like that, you need to make sure that even if you are on an increasing way of ISO, you need to ensure yourself that the ISO has to be intact in order to make sure that the quality is not compromised. Again, from the point of advice, all the photographers world over, or even from point of view of a philosophy of any photographer, most of the photographers used the lowest possible ISO. Now there is obvious reason that no photographers want to make low quality or inferior defined images. When I say inferiorly defined images, which means in a frame, if few colors are not defined properly, we say it's a noise of color. If white, gray, or black is not defined properly, we say it's a monochromatic noise. It's a mono noise. So likewise, you need to make sure that your ISO should be used in a low light in such a manner that it should not dampen your photo quality. The noise should not be there. The noise should be avoided. Then there will be 100% question from your side that if ISO is such an important element, why not all DSLRs or why not all uh, mobile does have ISO? So obviously every mobile manufacturing company obviously sets a target for ISO. Every DSLR have high capability of ISO. Now the problem starts even if in numbers they may have a fantastic ISO, but when it comes to actual sensor quality, the ISO is not up to the mark. So what all we actually pay in a DSLR say of 15,000 or a 20,000 and a DSLR say of a 2 lakh or a 2.5 lakh is nothing but a sensor quality. Find the sensor quality, the definition, the sensor definition, and the newest and latest technology which comes along with every sensor is what we actually end up paying. Fine. Based on this sensor quality, we generally attach sensitivity. And the moment we say sensitivity, it has to have something to do with ISO. So to keep in mind, whenever there is a low light, you need to make sure that the ISO to be used in such a manner which it doesn't give you the low quality image. Okay. If you ask me a ground rule, out of the triangle, this is the one element, or this is that one angle, the decision making there is the most easy one. Say traditionally, photographers never used to take ISO related decisions because we used to get films, negatives, the brown color films. Every film used to have dedicated ISO. So changing ISO from camera was not on the list at all. Hence, I said the exposure was never a triangle decision. It was never a three-angle decision. It was always a bi-angle decision. But as the ISO has progressed to the sensors and the quality of sensors have been, upscaled in every 6 months, 4 months, and the new things will never stop coming by. ISO is something which is very crucial, but at the same time, you should be able to sustain on one angle by saying that if you keep your ISO to the minimum, say most of the DSLRs gives you minimum ISO to 100. So I would suggest, if your lighting conditions are average, if your lighting conditions are good, if your lighting conditions are amazing, you are getting bright light, make sure your ISO is 100 always. Okay, there might be a situation where you would feel, okay, now my ISO is not at all working at 100. Say if you visit some caves in Meghalaya, or if you visit some low light situation landscapes somewhere, same for example Hampi, uh, then there is a possibility that this is a time where you should start changing your ISO. But again, as I said, you need to change your ISO in such a manner that your ISO allows you to keep your quality of image intact. The moment you lose quality, the fundamental of ISO as a sensitivity and quality gets lost. So make sure, as a thumb rule, if you want to ask me, the best ISO setting would be recommended at 100, conditions apply. Fine. At some point of time, maybe in low light situation where it's just not possible to get an image or to understand an object or subject, you may push your ISO, but to a situation where it doesn't give you any worry for the quality or give you any noise. Fine. So are we good for ISO, guys? You can give me a thumbs up, because one has to be extremely judicious and precautionary measures has to be taken. बहुत cautious होके ISO use करना है. The moment you overused your ISO, trust me, you're going to lose your quality every time. Every time you're going to lose your quality. Uh, all right, okay, I got your thumbs ups, guys. Fair. All right, so moving on to the second part, the second angle. Okay, even if you have any questions related to ISO, anything to deal with ISO, make sure you deal with your question just in the comment box. I'll note down the question, as and when we finish with exposure triangle, I'll go back to those questions. Okay, once we are done with the sensitivity standard or a quality standard of camera, let's move on to the motion standard or a motion angle of camera. The motion angle, as we understand, or what we hear as a noise of click. Fine. So that click is the noise where there is something physically happening inside camera. Fine. There is something physically happening inside camera. So just like something quickly being stopped or something quickly being clapped. Fine. In photography terms, we call them shutter speed. There is actually a shutter in front of sensor. So whenever you set your shutter to certain time horizon, we say the shutter speed is probably slow, or we say a shutter speed is probably fast or a standard. Fine. So the expression of shutter speed is done in fraction of seconds. Fine. There is something called as slow shutter speed. There is something called as fast shutter speed. But in a simple terms, if I want to quote shutter speed, it's a duration for which the shutter of the camera is open so that the sensor is exposed to incident lighting. The moment I say incident lighting, the lighting which is there in ambience, or the lighting which is probably going to hit at the back of the sensor. Fine. So, you decide that how long you want your sensor to be open to incident lighting or ambience, and how quickly you want to deal with. But when it comes to a decision like this, two or three things matters a lot. One thing, obviously, the subject. Fine, the subject speed is going to be the key. Say, for example, if you have a flying bird or a running mammal in front of you, and if your shutter is something which is standard or probably slower on a side, it is very difficult for you to actually capture that flying bird or a running mammal. So you need to make sure that as per the speed of your subject in a frame, you need to keep changing your shutter speed accordingly. Now, what is ideal shutter speed? What is best shutter speed? What are the cheat code of shutter speed? There might be thousands of blogs and electronic material you will be having. But trust me, there is nothing like ideal shutter speed. It's completely based on your experience, the 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 way in which you uh, explore your subject, the way in which the motion of your subject is, the way in which the lighting of that subject, the way in which ambience is being lit up, and the decision that how you want to make the frame. Say if there are photographers who want to make a blurry frame, then the shutter would be different. But then there are photographers who loves making, obviously everyone likes sharp images, crystal clear images. In that point of time, the shutter understanding is completely a key to this. Fine. So shutter generally is a time or a fraction of second, as we say, that how long you want your shutter or your sensor to remain open to incident lighting. Okay, Parth Ghorpade, I've noted down your question that what should be the shutter speed according to ISO. I guess I'll park this question aside for aperture. So as and when we finish with all the three angles, I'll get back to this question. Rugved, I've also noted down your question regarding ISO. Brightness, visibility, or conceptual quality, what plays a bigger role? Fair. You noted down this question with me. Okay, I'll rather pin this. Fair. All right. So any other doubts with shutter? I'll come back to shutter and ISO compensation 100%. I'm gonna come back to that. I've already listed that with me. Any specific doubt regarding shutter? A shutter is generally there in the front of your sensor inside camera. Don't ever bother to go and check where exactly is my shutter. It's not needed. It's there inside. It's 100% there inside. You just have to make sure that if you want to probably know what are long shutters, what are slow shutters, what are quick shutters, what are standard shutters. There are n number of YouTube videos where you can show, but people have been making long shutters for say number of hours to as far as possible. The fastest shutter what I've heard in last so many years is 1 by 8,000. There are few DSLRs who actually gives you a freedom to make images or frame by 8,000th part of 1 second. So understand the fraction, understand the quality of sensor, understand the requirement of photographer, and understand for 8,000 fraction of that 1 second lighting also required. There will be ambient lighting which is amazing. Otherwise, in a low light situation or in a standard light situation, one will not be able to use such a quick or a fast shutter. So you need to keep in mind whenever you deal with shutter, your subject motion, your light falling on that subject, and your light in ambience. Say when I say ambience, ambience is a light between the subject and an author. If I'm a photographer, I'm an author. From my destination to destination B, that is subject destination, whatever the light is there, it's called an ambient light. Fine. And we take a decision based a subject subject what or how much light is being falling on subject. We take a decision generally based on that as well. Fine. So you need to make sure that what type of shutter is required. uh, Again, shutter is extremely important for something like freezing certain action frames, uh, making sure that you stay on the blurs. If there are photographers who love to keep blurry images, there is a style, there is a philosophy of keeping blurry images. So people actually exploit shutter in such a manner that the philosophy or the storytelling aspect comes with the shutter a lot more times. Fine. So any doubts in shutter regarding shutter speed, you can put it in a comment box, and we will be moving to the most important angle out of three, that is aperture. Fine. Denoted with or expressed with something called as f number. Fine. Now aperture is nothing but a combination of blades, and what you say, that combination of blades allow, uh, obviously at the rear of the lens and at the opening of the camera. Aperture is something, what you say, is a circle. A circle, and a circle is formed by parts of blades. And whenever we take a decision based on aperture, it allows you to understand, or it allows us to understand how much light we are passing through our lens, so that that light is gonna hit our sensor. So let me just get back. ISO, we decided about the sensitivity and ability and quality. Shutter speed, we decided about how long the time horizon, that how long your shutter need to be open in order to hit the sensor, the light hits the sensor. And when it comes to aperture, the most decisive factor in photography is when, because it comes to quantity. Say I have uh, for a simple understanding, I have made some certain diagrams where uh, a specific understanding of every f number or aperture can be done. Fine. So say, please visualize that this is a back of the lens and the front of the camera, where this aperture is generally controlled with the element called diaphragm. Fine. Diaphragm is the controlling factor. uh, Namrata, I just saw your question regarding shutter speed. Why would one want to purposely make images blurry? Say for example, a blurry images are generally show to to project that there was a motion in the image. Say for example, uh, we see a lot of what you say, uh, light trails, or maybe say fireworks. So whenever we see images regarding fireworks, we obviously don't need a fireworks to be at top just like one spot of light. We love the firework images when the fireworks is actually fired and the spread is there in the sky. So we see the lot of spread. That spread is nothing but a very fruitful use of shutter speed. Fine. It's actually technically a blurry image where the the motion of those fireworks, or the firing part which comes down as a fireworks, is matched with the slower shutter speed in order to get that blur. Now, why we see only the fired part? Because that fire part is actually the only part lit up in the whole sky. So, in a black background, when you have the lights coming down to you as a fireworks, it's easy to understand the blur. So, the blurs like fireworks, or you might have seen light trails on traffic signals, or there are blurs which people use these days in food photography as well. People love to showcase the speed, the motion, and the only I would say the one of the ways to project motion or speed is to show blur. You know, again, a partial blur. I'm not saying the whole blur. If the whole image is gonna be blurry, it's non-focused image. But if the part of the image is blurry, photographers generally understand that as okay, the author has a right idea about the the shutter and the shutter speed and the subject. Fine. So people make purposely a lot of images which are blurry. Say for example, in our travels camping, most of the situation, say when we go out for special campings which or star trail. Now these all campings, what we do, we use lot of blurs. So what we do, we prolong our shutter. We make sure that the shutter is slow, and then there is a light which runs, you know, for a number of seconds or a number of minutes, from which we actually gain blurs, and that is how the purposeful use of shutter speed to the blurry situations is generally made. Fine. I'm coming back to aperture diagram which I have made for you guys. Fine. So ironically, or in traditional decisions, uh, the the aperture starts from f2.8. Fine, it's expressed in terms of f, and it starts from f2.8. The once it starts from 2.8, it reaches f4, then f5.6, then comes f8, f11, f16, and f22. Now, as per DSLR, and depending on the lens quality and the cost of your lens, your aperture may vary digitally. Fine. But from the point of view of understanding, these seven stops generally are considered as traditional stops of aperture. Fine. Now, digitally, your aperture can go to 30, your aperture can go to 40, 50, 60, but that's the digital framework DSLR has. Fine. We will only try and understand how aperture works, how aperture actually allows us to utilize the depth, allows us to utilize or decide the focal plane or the focal area of the image. You know, as I said, aperture is the decision which most of the photographers generally take, good time for, and it requires a good amount of experience and a time to in order to understand the right use of aperture in the right opportunities. So hence, please check this diagram. I guess as I'm open to the camera which is on my side, you won't be able to see, but I'll just try to show you. These are okay. Okay, let me put it this way. Okay, this way. This is better. Yeah. These are those traditional apertures where uh, we generally move. So the area which is here, this is an area which is open to sensor. These are the areas which are open to sensors. Fine. So as we move, if you see, now this is actually 2.8. So I guess with the mirror thing, I'm not so sure what exactly you are looking at. I'm unsure whether you are actually seeing this as 2.8 or not. Let me put it this way. Rugved, Namrata, someone can tell me, can you see this as 2.8 or 5.8? Because it's inverse for me. Is this 2.8? Can anyone tell me? Can you see this as 2.8 or 5.8? 5.8. Okay, Ishan, I've got it. All right, so consider this as, okay, 8.5. Fair, fair. All right, so consider this as a 2.8. Fine. This as a 4. This as a 4. Uh, this as a 5.6. All right, Parth, I got it. I got it. And this as a 8. Obviously, 8 is looking like an 8. Then comes, this goes as 11, this goes as 16, and this goes as 22. So just check, this is 2.8. Now 2.8 is a situation where your aperture ring, your aperture, what you say, diaphragm will allow DSLR to make sure that the maximum light can go through this. Obviously, say if the ring is open, to this quantity, the maximum amount of light will pass through, as compared to 4. From 2.8 to 4, the quantity will reduce. As compared to 4, 5.6 quantity will even reduce, further reduce. Then comes 8, the quantity will almost go half as compared to 2.8, or even 1/4. So as we progress to these diagrams, so this is the way the progression is: 2.8 to 4 to 5.6 to 8, then comes 11, then comes 16, and then comes 22. Fine. So starting from 2.8, reaching at 22. Okay, I've got another question. Give me a moment. Okay, Trida. Talking about fireworks, mobile cam seems to be an easy option. Why go for trouble of operating complicated DSLR? I will come back to this question. Surely, I'll come back to this question. Obviously, mobile allows you to even get the good exposure, even good frames. But then there are always going to be certain limitations when it comes to mobile. So mobile will probably give you good frames, say 3 or 4 out of 10 times, or 2 or 3 out of 10 times. The moment you understand the functions and fundamentals and shutter speed of DSLR, every time you click that firework, you're going to get the frame of your choice. Say the decisions when it comes to mobile, many decisions are not taken by the author. Photographer cannot take all the decisions of settings. Fine, it's most of the situations in auto mode. Say our next topic which I'm going to move to is obviously on exposure mode, so I'll come back to this mobile and DSLR once again. But to understand, and going back to say aperture, say at 2.8 your aperture is this big, and it starts reducing, and it reduces to the minimum f22. To give you an example, the contraction and expansion happens whenever someone put a torch to our eyes. The pupils, what happens with our eyes is, whenever there is a bright light, what happens with the pupils? They starts contracting. They contract, छोटे हो जाते. The moment there is no surround light or ambience light, the size increases. Fine. The same analogy was used for aperture. Fine. So aperture is confusing when it comes to numbers and size. Say like in shutter speed, we understand everything by, say, if you required more light, your shutter should be slow. When it comes to ISO, higher the ISO, lower the light. So it was easy that if you require, if the light is low, you will push your ISO, something like that. But when it comes to aperture, the number decision here is inverse. Find a shortcut which I generally suggest to all the students or people, that you need to keep in mind that higher the light available, fine, in ambience or in a situation, higher the light available, higher should be f number. So fundamentally, if the light, which is say a 12 noon light, which is bright, which is harsh, which is available with us, you will not require your diaphragm to react in a manner where your aperture is open to wide like 2.8. But in that situation, you want a minimum quantity of light to pass through your sensor. So higher the light, higher should be f number. So at 12 noon, your f number should be somewhere around 16 or 22, so that a minimum light is passed through the sensor. But when it comes to a situation where your light is low, say somewhere around sunrise time or somewhere around sunset time, the end of golden hours or the beginning of golden hours, when stuff like this is around, and when you feel the light is miserable, the light is not so great. So in that situation, you may probably consider now you need to make sure that your number has to go down. So lower the light, lower the F number, higher the light, higher the F number. So what happens with the higher F number? Your quantity reduces, and what happens with the lower F number? Quantity increases. So for example, going back to this again, fine, okay, it was it was like this, yeah. So going back to this, so this is 2.8, the highest amount of light, and this is f22, the lowest amount of light. Fine. So in a low light situation, I'm gonna look for 2.84 as my f number. But when it comes to a harsh light situations, travel situations, landscape situations where lighting is not a problem at all, I'm gonna consider f11, I'm gonna consider sunny 16. So these are those apertures I'm gonna be using. Yeah, Florence has a question. Yeah, Florence. At 12 noon, if we keep 2.8, what will be the result? Say if you are going to allow your aperture to be open like this, there is going to be sheer overexposure. So your sensor is going to be exposed to lot of light. And when sensor exposes itself to lot of light, the color of the frame is white. In photography terms, we call them burned image or overexposed image. These are photography terms. Fine, but okay. Ishan, a right F number in wildlife. Now, this is absolutely depending what type of wildlife one is planning to shoot. But the most famous F number for wildlife, okay, to begin with morning safari, would be the lowest possible F number. Say F4, F3.5, F2.8 are the most recommended for wildlife, as wildlife involves action all the time, and a photographer would never like to miss out on action. So if you have a lens, say 2.8, a good distance is 300 or 400 mm, it's a jackpot. It's a fabulous lens. They are extremely costly lenses as well. But for any low light situation, the lowest possible F number will allow you to actually go good on shutter. So when we start compensating the triangle angle, so the lower F number allows you to actually plug in quick speed at the best ISO again. At the best ISO. As I said, the ISO is gonna be our constant. Uh, the best ISO. Florence, I hope I have answered your question. Ishan, I hope I have answered your question. So just to sum up the triangle, I know the triangle has taken a lot of time. Okay, Mugdha. Nowadays we see so many highly colorful, vibrant images all over the social media. How much of it is because of the editing? Uh, Say a vibrant quality or a colorful quality is visually highly appealing. So obviously, people who are putting vibrant or colorful images, they are editing, but post processing and editing are part of photography. Say on a Instagram or on a social media or on a Facebook, there are very specifically, a segregation of two species these days. The people who make digital content and the people who make photographs. So one has to be very cautious when to call something a photograph and when to call something a digital content. Again, both has limitations. A photography or a photograph is 100% science and have aesthetic value, and it has a limitation of a genre. Say a wildlife had certain ethics, photojournalism had some ethics, product, beauty, fashion had some ethics. So the exploitation is something which we see a lot many number of times these days, and that exploitation actually leads to those vibrance and dynamic colors. The sensors will never give you the red dynamism or the yellow dynamism or yellow to blue dynamism in a single frame. So people have started understanding the visual appeal of the images, and they doctor the images, they club the layers, They make sure that in order to put that visual appeal, the dynamic and the vibrant quality of colors in images is important, and they keep pushing it to the extent that it actually goes visually appealing. And that is how they achieve at least the amazing attractive audience and amazing traction. But let me tell you, these are not the photographs when it comes to a qualitative matter. For example, if you want to actually go and check the quality even on your Insta feed, if you are following some influencer with a digital content, and if you feel that these are colors which are not true, go and magnify those images. You will quickly see a quality difference. Now compare that, go back to some photographer who probably doesn't have lot of likes and comments, or not a great traction, or he's not an influencer probably, or maybe a photojournalist. Go and check and magnify his image. You will see the quality being intact. So this is how they, it's completely up to a person that what the purpose they are putting those images for. But the highly colorful or the highly vibrant images are 100% due to the techniques of post processing with people are getting involved in. Fine. So the angle one is very specific, ISO sensitivity, the quality. Angle 2 is time span, obviously shutter speed. Angle 3 is aperture expressed in f numbers, so it's a quantity. And when we say, okay, I'm gonna make images, I'm gonna be photographer, these are your primary, secondary, and tertiary requirements. If you know your aperture, shutter, and ISO basically in a fundamental manner, you should be able to learn photography in probably 6 months, 8 months time if you practice photography every day. Fine. If these three things are neglected, and if you're gonna run around cheat codes, if you're gonna run around DIY, if you're gonna run around tips, tricks, the BTS and the replication of behind the scene, things are probably going to restrict to those skill sets. The learning, understanding, analysis, and using that practically on a scenario which might be challenging at a point of time is going to be missing. So fundamentally, the photography is dependent on these three organs. The most important organ among these three is again aperture. Fine. I can talk about aperture for long time. Aperture is something where every photographer has been still able to, or rather still trying to figure out the apertures. There is nothing called as perfect setting for aperture. Perfect exposure is a myth. It's completely a myth. It's completely on a author or a photographer that what type of image he wants to project. Because you, as a photographer, you actually express as author expresses via blog or stories, or a poet expresses via his poems. A good photographer expresses himself or herself via his images. Fine. So one has to make sure that your fundamental understanding of the angles is clear. Now, obviously, these angles are prime, what you say, a sustainable quality each photographer should have. But along with these angles, there are certain shortcuts as every DSLR generally come up with. Fine, these shortcuts are nothing but, as we call it, our topic number 2 as exposure modes. Now, why these shortcuts are given? If you have ever noticed on your DSLR, there is a control panel on top. Fine. Now, what exactly that control panel does is, control panel actually gives you a dedicated controlled scenarios which are there ready-made for you. Fine. So there is a night photography, there is a portrait photography, there is a landscape photography, there is a motion photography, there is a sports photography, and blah 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 blah. There are, the control panel is depending on many other situations. Fine. It's absolutely depending on a camera manufacturer to manufacture that what scene they are actually going to control on control panel or basis of control panel. But if you ask me about exposure modes or shortcuts or The ones which generally photographer also uses or recommends. Yeah, Vedant, what's the best camera settings for cloudy weather? Cause monsoon is beginning, like at least rough idea what should be enough. See, there is nothing like best camera setting for a scenario till the time you actually go and watch what is the light. Vedant, I would also recommend you that the moment you say a setting for cloudy weather, uh, let's assume it's a low light situation. The moment you say cloudy weather, it is either going to be towards blue or it's either going to be towards gray. So you need to understand the color understanding of the same. Say if the ambience is gonna be blue or gray or going towards the monochromatic black, there is a lesser light which is available. So in order to put more light, you need to obviously pull your aperture or open up your aperture to 2.8 or whatever maximum aperture you can put through. And depending on the shutter or depending on the motion of your subject, say if it is a travel photograph or landscape photograph, the mountains are running anyway. Fine, so you can use standard shutter. But if it is a, say it's a car, if it is a bus, if it is an aeroplane where it is in moving position, you need to make sure your shutter speed has to be right. So for travel and in a cloudy, a standard 100, 125, 200 shuttle would do in order to make sure that your uh, ISO is intact at 100. As I mentioned before, that we are not bothering much about ISO because we are sure that we are supposed to make quality images. But you can keep trying as per depending on your subject. You can keep trying the standard shutters ranging from 80, 100, 125 to 160 to 200 and see what you are getting because it's completely on your subject. If your subject is mountain, it's comparatively easy for you. A one or two test shot, maybe because the moment you say cloudy, so by the time you look at or observe the image and by the time you make the image, there is also a lag. There is also a lag. So the mountains which you are trying to capture might have some different light, and the place on which you're standing might have a different light. So you need to be extra careful and may try some trial and error 2 or 3 frames in order to make one good image. There is something called as bracketing as a function in most of the DSLRs gives, which I generally recommend bracketing as a function, which allows you to actually go for that dynamic quality which Mugdha mentioned earlier. That in order to get that dynamic quality, instead of going for editing, rather go for bracketing function, make 3 images and then stitch them together. So you get one image which is neutral at the settings which you are being putting, one image to cover the shadows, so which is underexposed in a cloudy situation, and one image which is overexposed. So when you merge all 3 images, that under, over, and say a neutral, you get that dynamic quality which we say, wow, kya colors are hai, what a blue, what a yellow, what a green. Those are nothing but the bracketing functions most of the photographers use. Fine. So I hope Vedant, you at least got a rough idea. I suggest go back to your manual, search where is your bracketing function in camera, use that function for next 1 month, as we hear that the monsoon is here since last 2 days. So use that, even if it is going to be from your terrace or window, it's completely fine. Use that bracketing to such a manner that you will see that your question was how, and now that result will reach to wow. That dynamic quality is generally that wow factor in the image. Fine. Okay, going back to exposure modes, I'm going to quickly cover exposure modes. We are almost moving more than an hour. We have half an hour more, so I'm going to quickly cover these exposure modes now. The most important, or rather I won't say most important, but the most effective what you say, or most used exposure mode people use when they, okay, I'm getting a notification that we have to restart this